This is Danny Flexen here for SecondsOut. Delighted to be joined by Lydia Daydol. Lydia, how are you?
Very well, Danny. Thank you very much for having me.
Anytime. Although particularly at this time, because we've got the biggest female fight of all time taking place on Saturday, Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano. Yeah. And as a female boxing journalist from Ireland, you kind of tick a few boxes on this one, it's fair to say. I guess, first of all, tell us a little bit about your own route into boxing or sports journalism and how that began.
Well, I take the title journalist very lightly. I think there's a lot of journalists that would be a bit offended, but I always say that I'm a conversationalist, passionate interviewer on the sport. But yeah, my journey in boxing, in combat sports, has been a very organic one. I started obviously in Ireland, what will be 8 years now, coming up in January. I was in music. I fronted a band for nearly 10 years in Ireland. We were signed to Universal Music, made some records, traveled the world. Basically, I retired from music and got into jiu-jitsu just for fitness, just to help myself deal with the kind of end of my career. And through that then met a couple of guys that worked for a promotion called BAMA, which is now Bellator Europe. Which I know you're probably aware of, which is an MMA promotion. They were doing events in Ireland, 4 events per year in the O2. So huge, massive scale events with Irish fighters, UK fighters. And I was asked to do kind of like social media, behind the scenes, kind of filming the fighters, getting sort of set up before, walkouts and results and all that kind of stuff. And through it, I just fell in love with fighting. I fell in love with combat sports. My family have always been involved in boxing. And I just saw it in a new perspective. And then something twigged and I was like, oh God, there's such a whole emotional process that goes into fighting that we don't get to see. Now things have changed a lot with the role of social media, of course. So we're starting to see a little bit more of that now. So what I started to do was just go to local shows in Ireland, sit in the front row, buy a ticket, sit in the front row, tweet, document, just put up the results. And it started to grow organically. Then I started to cover Muay Thai. I started then to compete in jiu-jitsu at a European level myself. So I started to get an experience of what it was like to fight or to grapple competitively. And then that led me into boxing, which led me into the move to the UK, which led me to Empire. So here we are. So it's been organic.
There was a lot to pack into a short time.
A lot to pack in, and I don't want to keep you like sitting here like my life story, but yeah, to wrap it all up, that's how I got here.
And when you first began this journey, you said 8 years ago, what was the female representation like in boxing and also in MMA? Were we at the Ronda Rousey stage then, or was it just before?
Yeah, it was just around the time that Ronda Rousey had started securing big contracts for herself. The UFC were starting to, put a focus on her. They were starting to build her kind of profile and the brands, I guess. More on a kind of a home scale. Aisling Daly, who would have been the first Irish MMA world champion, she was the first female black belt in Ireland. She was kind of, before Conor McGregor even got started. So she was making moves on the European scene. But because MMA wasn't the kind of forefront sport, boxing, hurling, GA, that kind of thing would have been the kind of leader. She didn't really get the recognition that maybe she should have deserved. She's now retired and ended up being in the UFC herself. But so Ronda Rousey would have been at the forefront of kind of like a global women's MMA.
So give us an idea of how, on the boxing side, things have changed for female fighters from when you started, which, I can't imagine there was much going on, to where we are now with 2 women headlining Madison Square Garden.
Do it's absolutely nuts, Danny, because, I've been covering the sport for 7-8 years, but I've obviously known a lot about what's been going on a regional scale and different things, especially in boxing with the Irish team and the women who are coming up through that. So to see where it is now, in particular, Katie, knowing her story, knowing her family at home, knowing the people who've trained with her, and what she had to go through to get to not only a professional stage, but a professional, high profile, high paying contract like what she got with Eddie when she turned over at Matchroom, DAZN. to now be headlining Madison Square Garden, it's absolutely phenomenal. And I always try and think about like, what is it? Because the boxing has always been there, the women have always been there, but why is it now that this platform has been given to them? I mean, it should have been done a long time ago, but yeah, it's incredible to see the journey that it's undertaken.
What's Katie's status like in Ireland? I know you don't live there now, but I'm sure you go back often and you grew up there as well. What's her status there like? Is she kind of a national hero? How is she received?
Yeah, so there's very few athletes in Ireland who've kind of transcended sports and who've become sort of like a national icon, as it were. And there's very few athletes that when they do anything on a global scale or even a European scale in terms of competing, that everyone would know about it and it will be a topic of conversation in pubs. And obviously pub culture is so huge in Ireland. It's a part of who we are. And it's hard to explain, you know, in words what the kind of velocity of when she fights, what it carries for Irish people, and you know how it makes the communities feel. It's like a sense of pride, and she's never disappointed us either in her career, professionally, personally. She's always championed Ireland. She's always been just such a perfect representation of Ireland, of Irish culture, of the fighting Irish spirit. So when she fights and when she does anything, it's more than boxing, it's more than sport. It's a conversation for people in the pubs on the weekends. You know, Katie's finally, what do you reckon? Then after the fight, well, what do you think? And there's that sense of pride. And the only thing that I can describe it to is when Ireland got to the quarterfinals of the World Cup, and you know, people were on the streets, and it was like, you know, people were ringing in sick to work on Monday because they wanted to celebrate this national win, this kind of Irish win, I suppose.
Obviously, I interview a lot of fighters, female and male, and Katie Taylor appears to be an inspiration to so many across both genders. How much impact do you think she's had personally on the growth of female boxing, particularly in the UK and Ireland?
I always knew that she was held in a certain on a certain platform in Ireland with like you say, both genders, and it was only really when I took the move to the UK over the last couple of months that I actually realized how big, how much of a scale she has inspired this new generation of fighters coming through, not just women, men and women. And it's you know, when you see it, like when I covered her last fight at the press conference of the weigh-in, fans who got to meet her were like shaking, crying. It's almost like this Beatles effect, you know, and like, thank you so much. And she not only inspires athletes or fighters, she actually inspires women, everyday people that, you know, because what she's had to go through. I know they started to touch on it now with kind of the press and the promotion that she's doing with Matchroom and stuff, but literally her dad, Pete, would bring her to like local interclub competitions when she was a child. No females, no girls were allowed to box. They would put on her head guard before she went into the venue, or they would hide her, slip her in the back door, pretend she was a boy, throw her in there with the lads. You know, she'd get the win, she'd take off the head guard then when she was back outside. Like, these are things that it's almost like a movie, you know. It's hard to think that this actually happened. Even in the stories of Katie in particular, you know, sparring Paddy Barnes, all the guys, and giving them as good as she got, you know, that's where her respect sort of started to grow, kind of on a, you know, in between gyms and the kind of hearsay. We do this job, you hear bits about sparring, you hear about stuff that goes on outside camp, and everything that came back with Katie was, you know, she fights like a man, which I suppose is one of the best compliments in a way that you could be sort of given as a female fighter, right?
And then you've got Amanda Serrano on the other side, who's had a different road, didn't have the storied amateur career that Katie enjoyed. You know, had a lot of shows and fights where she hasn't been paid, or she's had to cover her opponent's expenses, which will be a familiar story to a lot of fighters in the UK, I'm sure. And now she's coming to kind of upset the apple cart. And it seems in the last couple of weeks, the kind of general consensus seems to be shifting in favour of Serrano maybe causing what would be a minor upset, I think. What do you make of kind of Serrano's journey and going into this fight?
Yeah, do you know, I think as a biased fan of Katie Taylor,
Well,
I don't think that I could have wanted, or we could have gotten a better opponent for her to showcase what she can do on this big stage at Madison Square Garden. And I know I looked at the bookies, the odds this morning. Katie's gone as the underdog. You know what I mean?
well.
So like people are backing Serrano to win this, and I think especially with fight week, when people see Katie, they see her personality, how shy, reserved, laid back she is. We know she's not a fan of doing media work. We know she just wants to get in there and do the job. But Amanda is really, like, you can really see the benefits of her being around Jake Paul, being signed to, his promotion company. You can start to see how she's starting to play the game and play up to the cameras and stuff. And I think that, people who maybe aren't, maybe casual fans kind of see that and go, oh my gosh, she's going to take it. Like, she looks way more confident, and she's playing the game. And they're overlooking Katie, And yeah, I know the last couple of fights that Katie's had, a lot of people have commented that, she's on her way out, or she's not as ferocious as she was, but I don't think that is enough to warrant her being an underdog in this fight.
You mentioned Jake Paul there. So there's been a lot made of the fact that in the build up to this, and I understand why they're doing it, but Eddie Hearn and Jake Paul, who are the promoters, have been kind of focal points alongside the fighters of the pre-fight promotion. And I understand why they do it, brings more attention to the fight. They're both personalities, particularly Jake Paul, who, go beyond the boxing sphere. But as it's this big thing for females making history, equality, and all that kind of thing, do you think it maybe takes away from that a little bit to have them so front and center?
Like, it's a good point, and it's a good point, and I definitely see where you're coming from. But I also feel as much people are tuned in to want to see Katie and Amanda fight and hear from them, and maybe also hear about all the other women who, Layla Ali having a little soundbite, doing a bit of the promotion, and all these different people dropping in who are kind of like inspirational women, I suppose, not just athletes or in the sport. As much as we want to see that, and they are doing that, I still think there's a major bulk of fans, especially DAZN subscribers, who want to hear from Jake Paul. They want to hear from Eddie Hearn. So I think it's more a thing of, they're being clever with what they think will work, what they know will work, what people will want to see, where the eyes will be. But I think ultimately, they're just there to promote the fight, and they're doing a really, really good job in that. And, in the context of Jake and Eddie, they know how to sell a fight. They know how to sell a fight, which is why they're in the positions that they are in. Obviously, Jake Paul, controversial, to say that he's not exactly, been in the sport for many years. But Eddie, like, that's the gift that Eddie has. He knows how to talk, and he knows how to sell a fight.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. Nah.
Wait, was that a nice little diplomatic answer for you?
Yeah. I couldn't see the fence you were sitting on, but I know it's there. So big history-making event, Madison Square Garden, rightly being celebrated as a real step forward for female boxing, but there's still a way to go. What developments or changes would you like to see kind of springboarding off of this?
Well, I think, to point on what you were saying, ask me to comment on Amanda Serrano and her journey within the sport. Like, I know Katie has had difficulties in terms of like what she's had to achieve and trying to get to the Olympics before women were even allowed to be in the Olympics and all those different things. But Amanda has also had struggles in her career with, having to pay the opponents and getting to certain milestones in her career and being overlooked. And even for, the like, what are we, 7-weight division champion? Like, even at that, you could go on the street now and ask people, do you know who Katie Taylor is? Do you know who Amanda Serrano is? And maybe not a lot of people, unless they're in boxing, will know who she is. And she definitely deserves to have a way more recognition. So what I would like to see happen off the back of this, that, things start to change, and that we never have a situation again where there is a 7-weight division champion that, not every young person that's into sport or into boxing doesn't know who she is. So I think bigger paydays for women. Let's look at, the 3-minute rounds. Let's look at, as a boxing fan, I want to see women in more competitive fights. I want to see the divisions grow. I'm not a fan of, although I understand why it happens, but I'm not a fan of world title fights for women after like 5-6 fights. I think that we will only start getting the recognition that the sports deserves and that women deserves when the divisions start to grow, when, you know, there's more competition, I suppose, out there. But that will.
So yeah, so that's how it could be kind of a springboard for the future. What are you expecting on Saturday night, taking us right back to the present?
Well, I'm thinking, you know, again, taking off my bias hat. I think I think that you know, the 2-minute rounds are definitely in Katie's favor. I think that, you know, with her style, she's still, as much as she's very much in the professional side of the game, I still think that she carries a lot of her amateur style with her. And I think that at the start of the fight, she'll start winning the rounds. But I don't think that Amanda Serrano stops her. Now, I hope I'm not putting jinxing. I don't think she stopped her. I do think that Katie takes the decision. I don't think either of them stop each other. I don't think either of them drop one another. I do think it'll be left to the scorecards, and I do think that Katie will outbox her.